our favorite New York representative, AOC, had a town hall recently, and there's a video out that went viral, or is going viral at the moment, where we don't know what she was talking about beforehand, but the video cuts in, and people in the audience who are self-proclaimed supporters start shouting her down over the Democratic Party's stance on Ukraine and Russia, and how this appears to be moving us and the West closer and closer to war, or a war in Russia and Ukraine increasing to nuclear war. And so let's go ahead. Do you mind if we watch that real quick, that video? And ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, please go to American One. This article is up there. It's titled "AOC is humiliated by town hall at town hall, Warhawks and New York moving us closer to nuclear war." So I'm going to just jump right into the video. Here we go, and let's listen.
Okay. There's two things. First, federally, when the president's marijuana legal.
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because there are a bunch of war hawks. Okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China.
Okay, I know that's a little hard to hear for those of y'all who might be listening on podcast, but there is a man in the audience that just interrupted AOC and just said, you came in as an outsider, and now you are voting for nuclear war with Russia and China. Let's continue on.
Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that? Yes or no? Okay, simple.
All right. He goes on and tries to get AOC to denounce the Democratic Party, and he said yes or no. So looks like, and I know we were talking about this before going live. Looks like the anti-war anti-war wing of the Democratic Party is starting to rise up against, AOC. It was surprising to see that whenever I first viewed the video. So. Well, what do you think whenever you?
Well, Scott, first of all, as a conservative Republican, and someone who has throughout my entire career of studying international relations, I think been consistently accused of being a neocon warmonger, even though I'm not a neocon because I've always been a conservative, and I'm not a warmonger, although I believe in a strong military and deterrence and all those types of things. I would just like to point out this is probably the first time the Democratic Party has been called the party of the Warhawks since the War of 1812. Well, not exactly, but pretty close. Here's the thing. On the merits, okay, if we're talking about the criticisms of AOC here on the merits, I would say disagree with most of them in this sense. I don't think that the United States is on the road to nuclear war. I think that the idea that if Putin, and this is really important to point out because unfortunately Joe Biden is playing into this by saying we're at risk of Armageddon. Okay, if Vladimir Putin uses a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, which he is talking about doing, it is not the end of life on the planet as we know it. There's this terror on the left of nuclear power, of anything that involves nuclear. Which is part of the reason why they're so completely irrational in energy policy. That's a different subject. One tactical nuclear weapon is not going to lead to a thermonuclear exchange that will wipe out life on the planet. It will lead the United States to retaliate if that happens, and here's why. Because there's been a precedent set that we don't use nukes, and that precedent's been there since 1945. And it's in everybody's interest to make sure that precedent stands, because we don't want other countries, throwing around nuclear weapons in conflicts. So the United States will respond to that. I do not think the United States is likely to respond with a nuclear weapon. But the reason that no one's going to say we're not going to respond with nukes is because classically in the Cold War, the way deterrence works is you say nuclear is on the table as a way of deterring your opposition from using nuclear weapons because they're so afraid of what might happen. Okay, deterrence is broken down potentially if this happens, and I'm not 100% convinced that it will. But if this happens, deterrence is broken down because Vladimir Putin is irrational and Joe Biden's incoherent. That's why deterrence will have broken down. Okay,
and I think the difference, knowing that Putin is irrational and Biden is incoherent, makes everybody nervous.
It should.
I think that there's a heightened paranoia.
Yes.
Because it's kind of like children who know that the parents are drunk.
Yeah.
And now they have to care for themselves, and they have that underlying anxiety of okay, well, no one's watching the house. I am unsafe right now. But what do you think is going on? Like, do you think that this movement that was started by Tulsi Gabbard, in that video, they referenced Tulsi Gabbard, which we know earlier this week she made the announcement on Tuesday that was it Tuesday? I believe it was.
Yeah,
Tuesday.
it was.
Okay. That she was leaving the Democratic Party, and she specifically called them out on a whole list of things, and one of them that stuck out was calling them war hawks. And the elite cabal of warmongers. I mean, it was calling them a cabal. I mean, it was over the top. She did not withhold any attack. No. She just went full force. But as a Republican, especially a Republican during the Bush era, war hawks, as you said, are only reserved for Republicans.
I know.
Now, do you think that this is going to kind of take hold in the Democratic Party, even though they're misguided in a few of their points there?
Well, so here's where they're not misguided. Okay, here's where they have a point. I think they're wrong, like I said, on the merits, but they're not wrong about AOC. We know that if Ron DeSantis were president right now, or Donald Trump were president right now, and if Donald Trump was pursuing the exact same policy toward Ukraine that Biden is pursuing now, which, by the way, I actually believe that he would have, because we did more to arm and train the Ukrainians under Donald Trump than we did under Barack Obama. People have forgotten this, right? Because everybody wanted to get up on their high horse about how Trump was pressuring, Zelensky and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration was active in helping train and develop the Ukrainians, right? Aside from that one sort of weird incident that led to the first impeachment, which I think was ill-advised on Trump's part, but the impeachment was stupid. But aside from that, the record on supporting the Ukrainians is actually pretty strong. It has tended to be the Republicans that have been more hawkish on that, right? So what's happened now is that if Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis were president, AOC wouldn't be the one getting screamed at by that mob at the town hall. She'd be the one screaming about thermonuclear war on the floor of the House. Everybody knows this. Right? Everybody with a pulse who's watched politics knows this. But because it's the Democrats in power, she did vote for it. They didn't need her vote. That's the other thing. They did not need her vote to pass this. Because a significant number of Republicans also voted for the authorization. There were very few people who voted against it.
Well, there was a movement, and there's continuing to be a movement where at all costs support Ukraine.
Right.
Give as much money and weapons to them. And a lot of people are conflicted because while we want to support the good guy, and Russia is the perpetual bad guy in American culture, Western culture. He's not necessarily a good guy,
right?
But the consequence of what if the question of what if Ukraine and Russia just continuously progress?
Yeah.
And what if there is a nuclear bomb that happens? I think that really wasn't part of the equation when we first started off this support Ukraine thing, and now we're starting to really take a critical look at what could possibly be the potential consequences of that.
And Scott, I think a lot of this goes back to we have forgotten, and by we I also mean the foreign policy elites and establishment, because the Biden administration has been yes, they've been supporting Ukraine, but they've been a little bit kind of equivocal, and I think they are cautious about this, and they are concerned about this, but everybody seems to have forgotten how deterrence works. Deterrence does not work by de-escalating. Deterrence works by making the fear of the consequences that you will exact for someone taking an action high enough that that person is not willing to act. And so there's two possibilities. One is that Vladimir Putin miscalculated. Okay, he miscalculated with this war. He thought he was going to get away with it, but it was a rational calculation, a rational decision that he made. In that case, he is deterrable. Okay? In other words, there are things that we can do that will convince him not to use nuclear weapons. The other possibility is that Vladimir Putin is irrational, in which case Putin is not deterrable. Now, that doesn't mean that Russia is not deterrable, because one of the things that, from a foreign policy perspective, is really important to keep in mind, Joe Biden can't tomorrow just wake up, like he falls asleep on his desk, wakes up, accidentally bangs the nuclear button, and all the nukes go off, right? There are safeguards to prevent that from happening, right? So it's not like Putin himself has a finger on the button. And there are other actors within Russia that would have to then approve use of nuclear weapons. And these are folks who've been trained in the mutually assured destruction. These are folks who have worked in this field for a long time. They know that is a huge risk and a huge escalation. There was actually an incident in the 1980s where a false signal was sent to a Russian nuclear operator. And he's like, I don't necessarily know if this is legit. It looked legit. He didn't trust it. He didn't push the button. And if he had, there would have been a nuclear exchange in the 80s completely by accident. Okay, so there is sort of a cautious conservatism, I think, among the folks that would actually do the nuclear stuff in Russia. And so there's a hope, even if Putin is not deterrable, that we can deter people down the line. So what we need to be thinking about, and we need to have a serious, coherent policy of signaling and communication from the government of how do we deter Putin from using nuclear weapons. And that's a conversation I would love for us to have. I do think they're right in calling out AOC as hypocritical, because she is essentially saying it's okay for us to do this because there's a Democrat in office. And I think we can all say with a reasonable degree of confidence that if Trump were in office, if DeSantis were in office, if it was some other, Pompeo or Youngkin or some other Republican, she'd be agreeing with the people in that town hall. She'd be agreeing with Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes, if Trump were in office, it would have been. It would be 10 times worse for him. But
right.
I honestly, my opinion is that you're talking about deterrence and signaling. Trump, he acted like a wild man, but also in a wild man appropriate to the culture that he was talking to. Remember whenever he was talking to North Korea, he tried to go over and play nice with Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un wasn't playing nice, so he came over and he said, I will rain down fire.
Yeah, fire and fury. Yep.
Fire and fury, which is weird to us in the West. But over in North Korea, I can imagine that translated very well to that culture. So he was in my opinion, he was very good at signaling that he is stable, but unpredictable.
Right.
And it kept a lot of our enemies at bay. Our enemies see the nightly news. They see Joe Biden dropping the cards while he's having a live interview. They see him talk about his cognitive ability during 60 Minutes, and how his answer was unfocused. I think that was the question. How is your ability to focus? And so each one of these things showing a weak leader is sending a signal to other world leaders that, hey, it's okay to act however you want. That's my opinion. But if they are going to ramp up signaling and deterring right now, I think it's going to not fare well with the Democratic Party, because now all of a sudden the Democrats will be the ones that will be talking about using force in war, and I don't think I don't think the Democratic Party is willing to stomach that. No,
I think it would be one of those situations where, look, it is the right thing to do in the sense of it's what's in the national interest. It's not in the interest of the Democratic Party right now, and so I think Tulsi Gabbard has exposed a weakness. Now, let's be clear, Gabbard is a liberal Democrat. She has kind of rhetorically moved in a more moderate direction on social issues. But she is a down-the-line liberal Democrat. But she is a very committed anti-war, isolationist Democrat, right? She was in the Like, I became a Democrat because I hated the Iraq War. Like, that's her thing, right? And so when she's taking a brick back to the Democrats, it's because, you know, she is uncomfortable with the direction of the woke stuff, but also because the reason she was a Democrat in the first place was because of foreign policy. And so the question that Democrats have to be asking themselves is, how many voters are there like Tulsi Gabbard, and where do they live? This is not going to cost AOC her seat. It's not going to cost Democrats a ton of seats, because I suspect those ultra-progressive type voters are probably in deep blue seats. But it may cost them, you know, some votes on the margins in Senate races that they need to win, in gubernatorial contests that they need to win. You know, and I think there could be some upsets in deep blue territory that we're looking at, and how much of that is because, you know, that McGovernite wing of the Democratic Party that's been there since the 70s, that cut their teeth saying America's bad because America does things, right? I mean, that's essentially the foreign policy of the McGovernites, is that America's bad and any use of American power is bad. Are they going to stay home, right? And that's the concern if you're a Democrat and you're watching this thing with AOC, is that you're going to lose that dove wing of the Democratic Party.
It might. Do you think it might turn into a kind of like a libertarian version of the Democratic Party? Like they split off into kind of create their own group?
So Tulsi Gabbard is running for president. You don't make a public big deal about how you're leaving the Democratic Party and all this kind of stuff if you're not planning on running for president. Mm-hmm. And I think she probably knows that she's got no chance as a Republican. Her past record is such that, and I know people said, well, you know, it didn't matter for Trump, but Trump didn't have a record of voting with the Democrats on major issues. Gabbard would absolutely get destroyed in a Republican primary. So she's either hoping that Trump's going to be the nominee and that he'll pick her for VP because we know that he likes her, or she's planning to run independent. And so does that cost the Democrats in 2024? Maybe. It's really hard to say, but it certainly is a possibility.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see how if we get majority in the House and Senate, or at least one of them in the House during the next midterms, how Republicans will fare with against the backdrop of a nuclear possibility between Ukraine and Russia.